Time is a force that erases every trace. Or perhaps it simply hides them. In a small, secluded village in France where time seemed to have stood still, an old wooden barn remained. From the outside, it was nothing more than a crumbling structure long forgotten by the world. But behind its century-old walls, buried in the darkness, was something that had been waiting for its turn for 90 years. This story began the day a young man decided to clear out this ancient barn, unaware that he was about to wake a secret of history that was meant to remain silent forever. In the darkest corner of the barn, buried under layers of old hay and rusted scrap, he found something peculiar. It was a massive wooden crate. The dust settled upon it was so thick that even the black paint beneath was invisible. But the most startling detail was the set of heavy-duty military seals fastened to it. This was no ordinary farmer's storage. This was something that had been hidden with extreme care during the 1930s. When he wiped away the grime from a small metal plate on the corner of the crate, his heart skipped a beat. It bore the logo of a division that officially never existed. How did this crate stay here for 90 years? Who hid it and why? The village elders speak of a stormy night in the 1930s when mysterious men arrived in black trucks, quietly moving cargo into this barn. By the next morning, they had vanished, and nothing was ever heard of them again. But today, the secret was about to be laid bare. As he pried out the first rusted nail, a strange metallic scent drifted from within, a scent that was alien to everyone present. It felt ancient, yet it possessed a sharpness, as if the object inside were still alive. What was inside the crate? Was it a lost treasure, or something that should have remained hidden from the world? As the heavy wooden lid was finally lifted, every breath in the room hitched. The crate didn't just contain a single object. It held an entire system wrapped in deep velvet cloth. The fabric looked brand new, as if it had been placed there only yesterday. But it was the metallic object gleaming in the center that challenged every law of physics. The geometric patterns etched onto its surface and the faint blue light pulsing from within did not look like technology from this century. The question arose, how did a futuristic-looking device end up in a farmer's barn in 1930? Did our ancestors possess technology they deliberately chose to hide? Or was this part of a mission that had failed? In the corner of the crate, a small leather bag was found, embossed with the words, "Do not open until the signal returns." What was that signal? And had it finally returned? As the team attempted to lift the metallic object, a low vibration shivered through the entire barn. This wasn't just a machine, it was a message. The world believes we have discovered everything, but the truth is that countless secrets remain buried in the dust right before our eyes. This crate was only the beginning. The documents and maps found alongside it pointed toward ancient paths that had been closed off centuries ago. When the team finally opened the very bottom compartment of the crate, they found a photograph that chilled them to the bone. The photo was dated 1934, and it showed this exact crate, but the figures standing beside it did not look human. The metallic object sat on the dirt floor of the barn, its blue pulse casting long, rhythmic shadows against the rotted wood. But as the team stood mesmerized by the technology, the young man's attention turned to the small leather bag found in the corner of the crate. It was made of thick, treated hide, remarkably preserved, with a heavy brass clasp shaped like a coiled serpent, an ancient symbol of hidden knowledge. With trembling hands, he unfastened the latch. Inside were not gold coins or jewels, but something far more valuable to history. A collection of vellum documents and a small, handheld device that looked like a primitive yet intricate radio. As the papers were spread out, the team realized these weren't just notes, they were blueprints. They were dated March 1934 and signed by a man whose name had been erased from every official military record of the era, Dr. Julian Vane. According to the journals, Vane wasn't a soldier. He was a frequency hunter. The documents described the metallic object as a resonance key. Vane's notes claimed that the Earth didn't just have magnetic poles, but acoustic gates, specific locations where the fabric of reality was thinner, allowing for the transmission of data across vast distances of time and space. The barn wasn't a random hiding place. It sat directly atop one of these invisible nodes. The 1930s men in black trucks weren't hiding the crate from the enemy. They were hiding it from the signal. The signal is the caller, one entry read, written in a frantic, ink-stained hand. It has been broadcasting since the dawn of the last ice age, waiting for a receiver. We have built the receiver, but we are not ready for the caller. I have sealed the key here, in the heart of the silent earth. It must remain dormant until the air itself changes. Suddenly, the handheld device in the bag, the primitive radio, began to crackle. It had no batteries, no power source, yet a needle on its face began to jump violently. A low, rhythmic thumping sound began to bleed through the static. It was the same rhythm as the blue light pulsing from the metallic object. This signal Vane had feared for 90 years wasn't coming from the device. It was coming from the sky. The team looked at the photograph again, the one showing the non-human figures standing by the crate in 1934. Upon closer inspection, they realized the figures weren't standing beside the crate. They were emerging from the air behind it. Their silhouettes were blurred, as if they were out of focus with reality. Below the photo, a single line was scrawled in the ledger. They do not travel through miles. They travel through vibrations. If the key is turned, the door stays open. A sense of dread filled the barn. By prying open the crate and removing the lead lining that had shielded the key for 9 decades, they had inadvertently woken the receiver. The blue light was no longer just pulsing, it was expanding, forming a shimmering dome of ionized air around the metallic object. The temperature in the barn began to drop rapidly, frost forming on the edges of the crate despite the summer heat outside. One of the researchers reached out to touch the vellum map, hoping to find the location of the other gates mentioned in Vane's notes. But as his finger brushed the paper, the ink began to move. The lines of the map rearranged themselves in real time, shifting from a map of France to a map of the entire globe, with glowing red dots appearing over the Alps, the Antarctic, and the Sahara. The most terrifying realization came when the needle on the primitive radio hit the red zone. The static cleared, replaced by a voice, not a human voice, but a series of mathematical tones that felt like they were being spoken directly into their brains. It was a countdown. Vane's journal had warned, "Do not open until the signal returns." The team looked at each other, the same horrifying thought crossing their minds. The signal hadn't returned because of a miracle. It had returned because the callers were finally close enough to be heard. Outside, the farm dogs began to howl in a way that sounded like human screaming. The birds that had been nesting in the rafters of the barn suddenly fell dead to the floor, their hearts stopped by a frequency no human ear could detect. The resonance key was no longer just a mystery in a box. It was a beacon, and something was already following the light home. The barn was no longer a place of shelter. It had become a chamber of static and cold. As the countdown from the primitive radio echoed in their minds, the young man grabbed Dr. Julian Vane's second journal from the leather bag. This one was titled The Shadow Observations, March 12th to 19th, 1934. The ink was thicker here, pressed into the vellum with a force that suggested the writer's hand was shaking as he recorded the events that led to the crate being buried. The experiment was a success, and that is my greatest failure. The entry began. We tuned the resonance key to the frequency of the aurora, and for 3 minutes, the barn ceased to exist in France. We were standing in a bridge between worlds. That is when the shadows first stepped through. They do not have faces, only voids where features should be. They do not walk, they displace the space around them. The journal described how Vane and his team watched as these displacers moved through the barn. They didn't touch anything, but everywhere they passed, the wood turned to gray ash and the air became unbreathable. Vane realized that these beings weren't visitors, they were harvesters. They were looking for the resonance key, the very device Vane had built to find them. It was a beacon that told them the gate was open and the harvest could begin. Suddenly, a blinding flash of blue light erupted from the metallic object on the barn floor. The shimmering dome around it expanded, hitting the wooden walls with a sound like shattering glass. One of the researchers, mesmerized by the light, stepped forward to touch the glowing core. Before anyone could shout a warning, his hand passed through the blue light. He didn't scream. He simply vanished. Where he stood, there was now only a faint, swirling mist of gray ash. The countdown on the radio reached its final 10 seconds. The rhythmic thumping from the sky was now so loud it vibrated the very teeth in their heads. The young man frantically flipped to the end of Vane's 1934 journal, looking for a way to kill the power. He found a final, desperate drawing. A diagram of the resonance key with a single pin located at the base of the geometric etchings. If the signal returns and the jailer is gone, the key must be grounded, Vane had written in a jagged script. It requires a sacrifice of energy. The key feeds on the surrounding heat. To stop it, you must feed it a cold far greater than the ice. But they were in a barn in the middle of summer. There was no liquid nitrogen, no ice, nothing to ground the heat. The air inside the dome was already dropping toward absolute zero, and the team could see their own breath turning to ice crystals in midair. The shadow figures from the 1934 photograph began to manifest in the corners of the barn, dark, elongated shapes that seemed to drink the light. The countdown hit 0. The primitive radio went silent. For a heartbeat, there was no sound at all, not even the wind outside or the howling of the dogs. Then, the roof of the barn was torn away, not by wind, but by a massive, invisible pressure from above. Looking up, the team didn't see the stars. They saw a vast, geometric shape hanging in the atmosphere, perfectly aligned with the resonance key. It was the collar. A beam of pure, white frequency descended from the sky, locking onto the blue dome. The metallic object began to spin, its geometric plates unfolding like a mechanical flower. Inside the core, a dark, rotating sphere was revealed, the heart of the key. The shadow figures in the barn moved toward the light, their forms becoming more solid, more real with every passing second. The young man realized that 90 years ago, Vane hadn't just hidden a crate, he had paused a war. And by opening it, they had restarted the clock. As the first shadow figure reached out a hand toward him, he saw the leather bag's brass serpent begin to glow with a strange counter-frequency. The secret wasn't just in the crate. The secret was in the bag itself. The barn was no longer a structure of wood and hay. It had become a localized distortion in space. As the shadow figures closed in, their presence felt like a heavy weight pressing against the team's chests, making every breath a struggle. The young man's eyes were locked on the brass serpent clasp of the leather bag, which was now vibrating with a fierce, emerald green light that stood in sharp contrast to the cold blue of the resonance key. Frantically, he tore the brass serpent from the bag. As it came free, he realized it wasn't just a decoration, It was a key within a key. The serpent's tail was actually a precision-machined probe, etched with microcircuitry that seemed impossible for 1934 technology. He remembered Dr. Vane's final warning in the journal. The key must be grounded. It requires a sacrifice of energy. The white beam from the geometric collar in the sky was now so intense that the walls of the barn began to dissolve into ash. The shadow figures were mere inches away, their featureless voids fixed on the metallic object as it unfolded its final mechanical layer. With a desperate lunging motion, the young man dived through the freezing blue dome, the air so cold it felt like needles piercing his skin. He slammed the brass serpent probe into the base of the spinning plates, right into the heart of the key. The effect was instantaneous and violent. A shockwave of green energy erupted from the contact point, colliding with the blue radiation. The two frequencies fought for dominance, creating a shrieking sound that shattered every window in the nearby farmhouse. The young man felt the heat being sucked out of his own body. The sacrifice Vane had written about wasn't just physical heat, it was the thermal energy of anything nearby. The shadow figures shrieked, a sound that vibrated not in the air, but directly in the team's marrow. As the emerald light surged, the shadows began to flicker and turn translucent. They weren't being destroyed, they were being pulled back, the resonance gate forced into a reverse polarity. But the collar in the sky did not retreat. Angered by the interference, the massive geometric shape began to descend, its shadow covering the entire village. The white beam turned into a pulsing crimson, a destruction frequency meant to level anything that interfered with the harvest. "It's not enough," one of the researchers screamed over the roar of the collapsing barn. "The serpent is only a temporary mute. We need to shut down the signal at the source." The young man looked down at the vellum map that was still shifting on the floor. The glowing red dots over the Alps and the Antarctic were now flashing in sync with the crimson light in the sky. He realized that the barn was just one piece of a global machine. To stop the collar above France, they had to activate the other gates simultaneously, or risk the entire planet being harvested. As the barn's roof finally gave way completely, the young man saw a hidden compartment pop open at the very bottom of the crate. Inside was a second photograph, but this one wasn't from 1934. It was a digital print, dated 2026, showing the young man himself standing in front of the barn, holding the serpent. Dr. Vane hadn't just predicted the discovery, he had planned it. The 90-year wait wasn't for the signal to return. It was a wait for the right jailer to be born. The sight of the digital photograph dated 2026 sent a jolt of pure terror through the young man's veins. It was impossible. The image showed him in the exact clothes he was wearing, holding the brass serpent, standing over the wreckage of the barn. But as he looked closer, he noticed a series of coordinates printed on the back of the photo in glowing, bioluminescent ink. These weren't just locations, they were timestamps. Dr. Julian Vane hadn't just been a scientist in the 1930s. He had been a traveler, or perhaps a messenger from a future that was now trying to save itself. "The signal isn't from space," the young man whispered, his voice barely audible over the crimson roar of the collar above. "It's a broadcast from our own future, sent back to be intercepted in 1934 and triggered in 2026. The geometric shape in the sky, the collar, pulsed with a final, blinding crimson light, preparing to initiate the harvest. The shadow figures, now partially restored by the crimson energy, began to merge into a single, massive entity, a guardian of the gate. But the young man knew he had a weapon that Vane had spent 90 years perfecting. He grabbed the shifting vellum map and slammed it onto the heart of the key, right next to the brass serpent. The map didn't burn, it integrated. The glowing red dots on the Alps, the Sahara, and the Antarctic began to feed their frequencies into the resonance key. Suddenly, the barn was filled with holographic projections of other people, other jailers across the globe, standing in similar ruins, holding similar serpent keys. They were all connected in a single, massive neural network across time and space. Vane's voice finally erupted from the primitive radio, no longer a series of tones, but a clear, recorded message from 1934. If you are seeing this, the paradox has closed. You are not a victim of this discovery. You are the architect. The crate was never hidden to be forgotten. It was hidden to be matured. The energy of 90 years of silence has been compressed into the serpent. Turn it now and broadcast the silence back to the source. The guardian entity lunged forward, its void-like hands reaching for the young man's throat. But as it touched the emerald light of the serpent, its form began to unravel like thread. The young man realized that the shadows were just echoes of humanity's own fears, amplified by the frequency of the signal. To stop them, he didn't need to fight. He needed to harmonize. He gripped the brass serpent and twisted it 180 degrees, clockwise, the direction of the future. A pillar of pure, white-green light shot upward from the barn, piercing through the crimson beam and hitting the geometric collar directly in its center. The sky didn't explode, it hummed. The massive shape began to vibrate, its sharp edges softening and turning translucent. The global network of jailers pulsed in unison, creating a worldwide interference pattern that neutralized the harvest frequency. But the price of the synchronization was high. The resonance key began to glow with such intensity that the metal started to liquefy. The young man felt his consciousness being pulled into the map, his memories beginning to merge with the coordinates. He saw the 1930s, he saw the 2020s, and he saw the wasteland that would become the future if he failed. "The signal is a loop," he shouted to the remaining researchers. "We have to break the loop by becoming the signal." Just as the geometric shape in the sky began to shatter into a million fragments of light, the young man felt the floor of the barn vanish beneath him. He wasn't falling, he was being displaced. The 2026 photograph in his hand began to fade, replaced by a new image, a photo of an empty barn, 90 years in the future, with a new crate waiting to be found. The harvest was stopped, but the gate was still open, and the true purpose of the caller was finally about to be revealed. It wasn't an invader. It was a lifeboat. The sky above the French countryside didn't just clear, it transformed. As the geometric fragments of the caller dissolved, they didn't fall as debris. Instead, they turned into a soft, shimmering rain of pure data, light that carried the history of a world yet to come. The young man stood in the center of the now-ruined barn, the resonance key glowing one last time before cooling into a dull, harmless gray stone. The shadow figures were gone, the emerald light of the serpent had faded, and for the first time in 90 years, the signal was truly silent. Dr. Julian Vane's final journal entry began to glow on the floor, the ink appearing for only a few seconds before the vellum itself started to turn to dust. It was the message he had spent his entire life waiting to deliver. The harvest was never about destruction, the entry whispered into the young man's mind. It was about preservation. The callers are us, humanity from a timeline that has already collapsed. They sent the key back to 1934 to find a node that could hold the weight of their collective memory. They didn't come to take our world. They came to find a place where their history wouldn't be forgotten. The realization hit the team with the weight of a mountain. The Vanguard wasn't a weapon or a beacon for an invasion. It was a hard drive of a lost civilization, our own. By synchronizing the global network of jailers, the young man hadn't just stopped an attack. He had successfully downloaded the survival blueprints of a future humanity into the present-day Earth. The shadows were the echoes of those who had lost their physical forms in the future collapse, reaching out in desperation for a bridge back to reality. The 2026 photograph, which had flickered between images of the barn and a wasteland, finally settled. It now showed a thriving, green city built with technology that looked identical to the geometric patterns on the resonance key. The loop was broken. By receiving the signal and grounding it, they had changed the trajectory of the future. The wasteland no longer existed. As the sun began to rise over the village, military helicopters and black SUVs began to swarm the perimeter of the farm. The men in black of 1934 were being replaced by the intelligence agencies of 2026. They moved with speed and precision, cordoning off the area and seizing the remnants of the crate. But the young man didn't resist. He knew that the most important part of the discovery wasn't in the wood or the metal. It was in the journals he had already committed to memory. "It's over," one of the researchers said, looking at the charred remains of the barn. "They'll take it all. They'll bury it again in some underground lab." The young man looked down at his hands. A faint, emerald glow still pulsed under his skin, a remnant of the serpent's frequency. "Let them take the box," he replied. "The signal isn't in a crate anymore. It's in the network. Every person who saw the light last night is now a part of the frequency. You can't bury a secret that has already been heard by the world." The video ends with a slow, cinematic drone shot pulling away from the farm. We see the military blockade, the scientists in hazmat suits, and the crater where the barn once stood. But as the camera rises higher, we see the other nodes across the globe: the Alps, the Sahara, the Antarctic, all glowing with a faint, synchronized green light. For 90 years, a farmer's barn held the secret to our survival. We opened the crate expecting a mystery, and we found a mirror. The signal didn't return to warn us of an ending. It returned to give us a beginning. The question is no longer what was hidden in the barn. The question is, now that we have the blueprints for a better tomorrow, what will we build? The screen fades to black with a final, chilling whisper from the primitive radio. The frequency is yours now. Do not let it go silent again.